So why don't we start? This is a meeting of the Longfellow School Building Level Advisory Committee. And I'm Nick Mavadonis. I'm the one of the co-chairs of the committee. Jeff Irish is the other co-chair, school board member, and he's probably not going to be able to join us tonight unless he can a little bit later. So our agenda for Javier or Mark or anybody from the team, do you want to say anything before we get started, or do we want to try to deal with the minutes of the meeting? Javier, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Normally we do the minutes and then we walk through the agenda and then we turn it over to Harriman.
Sounds good. Let's do approval of our prior meeting minutes from our last meeting. Could somebody make a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes of the previous meeting.
And who made that? I'm sorry.
Joe.
Joe Carter.
Joe, thank you, Joe. Is there a who seconded?
A second.
Jeff, thank you, Jeff. Are there any comments or questions about the minutes? Seeing none, I don't think we're doing roll calls at this. So everybody in favor, just put your hand up. Anybody opposed? No. Okay, that passes unanimously. Now I will turn the agenda over to Mark. Are you kicking it off?
Yes, yeah, I am, Nick. Thank you very much. Let's see if I can share my screen here. And once everyone can see that, let me know. We're good? Great. Well, good evening, everyone. Good to have you with us. We have some important stuff to go over tonight. Not a lot of visual stuff, but some important agenda items, and we'll go through those. We're in the 7:30 slot, and so the good news is you guys always know that we're the last meeting. So if we need to accommodate for time, we can certainly do that. As we go through, if there are questions, we'll try to make sure that we pause and allow time for people to ask questions. Certainly, if there's a hand up, I'll keep my eyes peeled, and I'm sure Chair Mavadonis will call on folks and facilitate the asking of any of the questions. So without further ado, I'll launch into our slide deck here. So we have a scope update just on Longfellow. We're going to actually skip item 2. You know, we're being very efficient. We're going to jump from 1 to 3 on the agenda. And so, the scope update deals specifically with a budget item for this and construction cost. And so that's an item that we want to bring to everyone's attention because it's a slight shift in the scope. I shouldn't say slight, it's actually a fairly decent shift in the base bid scope of the project. And so we want to allow enough time to have a thoughtful conversation on that. And that was been discussed at the District Advisory Building Committee last week. And so we're here to bring that item up. The next item is a update on where we are with the planning board. And then we'll have a school board update and what that process is to get us ready to go out to bid. As you all know, that Longfellow is the first one that goes out to bid here, and we're imminently inching towards that time. So that's really exciting. We'll go through a project budget update and where the project costs are for this project, and also how they fit into the context of all of the 4 BFOF school projects. And one of the last items we'll look at is the commissioning and what commissioning is and what that brings to this project. And then lastly, it's sort of looking at next steps and where we are as we, again, are right on the footsteps of sending this to contractors for pricing. So that's what we've got planned here. The first one is a scope update. And so we have the alternates that were ranked by this group. We had a poll. I think we did it by SurveyMonkey, if my memory serves correct, and Emily Waugh helped us assist in doing that. And then through that, these are the items that were identified. There's been a few modifications to those. One is that the windows that have, some of those have actually been adjusted during the CARES Act funding, and so those Steve Stilfen, Doug and company have already started to address some of the operation of those large windows and the difficulty in opening those. The other one that was removed was number 6, and that was direct digital controls. That's what the DDC stands for, and that's replacing pneumatic controls, just air controls. That was state of the art when the building was built, and the idea that you would turn equipment, you would actuate equipment on and off through compressed air through lines, and that's all now done with electrical controls. And so but the idea is that if we took the alternates for number 1 and number 3, those all come with electronic controls, and so there would be no need to update to DDC controls, because if we took those alternates, they would be upgraded. So that one was a sort of redundant alternate that has been removed. The very last one is the one we want to have a conversation on tonight, and that is the cafeteria and kitchen. And we'll go through a series of discussion, and not that it needs to be prioritized as number 8, but we'll have a conversation about why that's listed now as an alternate scope item. So the floor plan you have in front of us here is the lower level. We don't call it the basement because it's not a subgrade entirely. There's a day-lit portion of the spaces. Certainly the front, the lower part along Stevens Ave is the part that is below grade. But as you move towards the top of the screen, the grade slides down, and where the addition is, we're entirely above grade at that point. And as we've talked, the idea is to remove the 2 rooms that are in the area shown in blue, move those into the new addition, and that's shown in green, and that's right now identified as ELL Gifted and Talented. That's one of the rooms, and then the other one is a reading room, a specialist room. And we also have stairs identified on the plan, and those will allow us to circulate up and down. And we have been showing a cafeteria and kitchen on the right-hand side of that addition, and that is what we're showing as an alternate now. The reason that we're showing that as an alternate is because the construction documents, we sent them out to get estimated. The costs came back, and that portion exceeded what our allowable funds were for the project. And so and we'll kind of give you a history of how we got to this point in the scope of and the estimating of the project itself. The upper level of that portion of the building itself, again, the areas in blue and gray haven't changed from the last time we presented them. Those simply identify the scopes that we're renovating. The gray is that the renovation of removal of the hazardous materials and the new finishes and new instructional technology, new built-ins, and new ceilings and new lighting. So those classroom renovations and those significant renovations throughout the building, those are not adjusted. The blue areas are a slightly lighter renovation where we have, I'm sorry, the blue is heavier renovation where we actually have reconfiguration of walls. And so it has everything that's in the renovation, the gray, but it also involves reconfiguration and new walls. And in several aspects, or several of those areas, new mechanical systems as well. The green in this is also, we've got the elevator. The one modification that you may notice in the elevator is that there's a little vestibule that is shown between the elevator shaft and where you enter into the shaft from the building itself. And that is to accommodate the fact that the elevator itself, to have entrances at a 90-degree on one level to another, is a very specialized elevator, and the complexity of trying to accommodate that in the building was much more efficient to be able to just build this vestibule in. So from the vestibule, you can see on this level, it goes enters from the side here, whereas on the next level, it enters from the bottom of the page. And so then that vestibule allows us to accommodate that with still having the same alignment of the doors on the elevator at each level. The green area on this, the primary or first floor level, is still indicates with the pre-K and the stairs, and so there's no change in the scope of work from this level in terms of what is usable space to be constructed. So even though there's identified as a yellow dash box around it, that was just the upper volume of the cafeteria. What it also did have, though, it had a mechanical mezzanine above the kitchen, and so that was where a mechanical or a air handling unit to bring in fresh air and condition it. That's where that would have been located, and so that is an alternate now, and that primarily served that whole addition. So that's no real change in the functional spaces in this level. And then the upper level, again, this is very similar to as it's always been, with the exception of that elevator just grew a little bit, the shaft and enclosure just pushed out a little from the building, but the rest of the configuration is as we've been sharing all along. A little bit on the development of where we're at with the alternate, looks like, hang on, before we get to that, this is I got a little bit out of order here, I think. Emily, do I have the right, let me see here.
Yep, it's in the budget section.
Okay, it's in the budget, very good. All right, so a little more on that further down, sorry about that. So just to update on where we are with the planning board, in order to get this project ready for construction, we also have to have planning board approval. And there are two parts to it. There's a conditional use approval that has to happen, and there's a full site plan review. We had a workshop on February 23rd for the conditional use permit, and I'll actually ask maybe Lisa to share a little bit about where we are in that process. I think Lisa attended that workshop and can fill us in. Lisa?
Absolutely, yeah. So the workshop was very successful. Not too many questions were raised around the project itself. This was for the conditional use. Some simple questions around the addition, some of the materiality, and whether it was considered a historic building or not. We were essentially approved to go on to the next stage, which is the hearing. And I believe we just got confirmation earlier today that that hearing will be next week. I'm sorry, the 9th, not next week, week after. I'm missing a week. The week after next, which is the 9th. So we will be at the last stage of that approval process.
Any questions on the planning board? Again, we'll cover a little bit more on the scope and the alternate and cafeteria kitchen in a second here in the budgets.
Don't see any.
Okay, we'll keep rolling then. Very good. So the project budget update. So the project budget, this is just an overview of, again, the process of how we arrived at the current allocations of the different funding. And it began about a year ago when we got initial pricing back that the LICEF model, as we all probably didn't want to forget, but the LICEF model costing that we did exceeded the remaining funds. We did a lot of deliberation on what the appropriate direction would be. That was in concert with the District Advisory Building Committee, the school board, and so there was a really important aspect of thinking about equity across the remaining schools and addressing the most critical issues with each of the schools. We landed on a scenario 1A, which was I think at one point the preceding terminology for it was in the spirit of the classroom option. And that scenario 1A is what we've carried since March to this point. So it's been about a year. The values that we have allocated here are the total project costs. And so we'll break that down in a minute here, but those are the total projects. And what we've identified that since last March is that with these items that we were trying to do with the classroom scope 1A, we still had an overall deficit of about $600,000 and the total project for the BFOF that exceeded the BFOF bond amounts at about $600,000. We were, again, at that point, we weren't too worried. As a percentage, that was a pretty small amount, and that as we track the projects, we would look to see how that would be accommodated. One of going through a chronology of the discussion around the scope, particularly for the Longfellow School, the scenario 1 classrooms, and this was before the 1A, but this was in February of 2020. This showed a classroom addition for art music pre-K of about 5,300 square feet, abate the existing classrooms, and do the interior renovations to the existing building, secure entry, elevator, miscellaneous upgrades. That was, again, that was sort of precursor to, that was sort of scenario 1 that was presented before we came away with 1A. At a meeting with the DABC, Harriman was to meet with the leaders of each of the 3 schools, and in concert with them come up with what were to be the priorities for funding, understanding that we had limited funds and we had to make some tough decisions. One of the aspects that was concerned is that the renovation costs, including the abatement, of Longfellow would mean that we wouldn't be able to do a full renovation of a full addition was contemplated in the scenario 1. It was, and so what we looked at in scenario 1A is that that we could either address adding on scope to the building, or we could address the interior, but we didn't have money for both. And at the time it was felt that the interior renovations and really improving those classroom environments was where the priority should be. And so that's kind of where we really established what the current scope is, the scope of 1A. And so in March of 2020, that 1A was revised to be the secured entry, the abatement, renovation, and existing classroom reconfiguration, the elevator, the miscellaneous upgrades to life safety code, about $2 million, new bathrooms and renovation to existing ones for ADA compliance, the electrical infrastructure that was required as recommended in the report and the Sebago Technics report. So that was the revised 1A scope. And through up until about July, we were carrying that forward. We didn't show an addition onto the building. And it was at the second community forum that we got some feedback. And the feedback said that there was a concern about whether or not they're lacking a pre-K room in the school, and moving the spaces, educational spaces that were in the lower level out of that space, creating space for them, and the fact that there was no cafeteria or kitchen as part of the concept for this. At that time, we actually got a design development estimate, and the existing building scope of work was about $8.5 million. So it was a little bit, we were under our $10.5 million budget. So that was at the point where we said, and that included about a $1.2 million cost for abatement at that time. So the design development estimate was built on drawings that we proceeded with to get to about a 40% completion of the design itself. And so at July, we started looking at, when we knew we had some additional funds, we said, well, what would it look like to add on those items that came forward as concerns, the pre-K, the 2 rooms that were in the basement, and the cafeteria. And so this was very early on. We can see where it just even says cafeteria, warming kitchen. There was no design for it. It's really a block of space, and this is how we would show it and start to develop it going forward. And then the first floor, likewise, showing the pre-K room, the stairs, and the corridor. So that was an early design that we started showing in July at that time again. And at that point, I think it was still conceptual. We hadn't had it estimated. We're looking at how this would configure onto the building itself. And so that we developed the renderings around what that would look like. The construction cost estimates that we now have on that total area show us being over by amount of about 3.8 million. And sort of how that breaks out is the existing building scope of work that we actually had a DD budgeted about 8.5 million. It's actually been reduced, and some of that is actually a reduction in the abatement costs. So the abatement costs were initially estimated to be about 1.2 million. They're now estimated to be about $800,000, and that is just because we had better quantities that we evaluated and a little sharper understanding of what would be required to replace the systems when we took the material out. The pre-K ELL reading edition, that's the smaller portion of that, that is estimated at 2.5 million for that work. So while that was that portion, just the pre-K ELL, the 2-story piece, that is a little more than our $2 million surplus that we had at DD. It's still within budget at this point because of the fact that the existing building renovation came in slightly under what the DD estimate had it at. So all that being said, those two are balanced, but the cafeteria warming kitchen is estimated at 3.8 million. And this is really the first pass at looking at what the cost of that is, and that's because as we develop the document, we have had to address issues such as the cost of replacing the retaining wall. We can't use that existing retaining wall in the back of the courtyard against the new addition. So we actually have to build a new retaining wall as part of the cafeteria kitchen addition. The warming kitchen itself has equipment that costs a fairly significant amount. Again, there's not a lot of it, but there's a lot of ventilation systems to it. There's health codes that we have to comply with. And so there's it's more than simply just a few pieces of equipment there. And then we also have the mechanical mezzanine, which was a little more complex than just adding on the box of a cafeteria. And then we had site development costs. We have a loading dock that requires retainage to get deliveries to the back of to the kitchen area, and all of that added to the complexity of the cafeteria. So all that adds up to say that component of it is more than what it was available for funds in that we had available after our DD estimate. So while we've been somewhat hopeful that the total that we're showing on the addition of the back would be within budget, the reality is that we are able to accomplish more scope than originally thought at the establishment of the scenario 1A, but not enough to capture the separate cafeteria and warming kitchen. We are carrying it as an alternate, but with a price tag of about 3.8 million or so, we don't think it's likely that our contractor pricing is going to come in to the point of being that favorable to be able to have funds in that amount to award that alternate. But we are designing the building in such a way that could be added on in the future, and so everything we're doing now won't have to be undone, or parts of it won't have to be undone to add on this addition in the future. I will pause here to allow any thoughts or questions, comments on this part of it.
So if anybody has questions or comments, please put your hand up. I am not seeing anything, Mark.
Okay, I will proceed from that portion of the
presentation. Can I
absolutely.
Mark, can you talk about what happens then as the alternative in terms of the current, the current situation is the cafeteria, is also the gym. There's some serious storage issues associated with it. Have you guys thought through how does the design accommodate for some improvements in the current meal situation without, adding the cafeteria?
Yeah, I think that's probably a conversation we want to have with Principal Young. Right now, and I guess there hasn't been, a significant amount of thought of how do we make improvements to that. Not that we can't have that conversation. I think right now the thought is that it would be as was contemplated with scenario 1A, which is that I think the practice would be as it is today, which I think the younger students, Terry, they go to the cafeteria, and the older students take food up to the classrooms. Is that correct?
The third graders and the the second graders and the fifth graders eat in their classrooms, and K and 1 eat in the cafeteria or the gym, and 3 and 4 eat in the cafeteria. Yeah. And I know there's a challenge with tables and the storage of the tables in the hallway, and so
that's what I'm referring to. Is we've got to figure out a better system for all of those things, because that is that's very problematic.
Yeah, one suggestion we might look at are if there's a way we can find a furniture solutions, and maybe even if there's a way to find a place to create storage, so that if we had stackable chairs and tables that could fold up, is there a way of doing that as an alternate to the larger folding long tables that you have now?
Okay.
We have Emily has her hand up.
Hi. Have you looked at, instead of building a cafeteria and a warming kitchen, just building a gym instead, so that you don't have the cost of all the, like the kitchen equipment and the air handling? And I was just wondering if anybody had, priced that out, and maybe it would be a little bit closer to the differential.
Yeah, I think early on we looked at, Emily, in fact, I think it was at one point where we actually shifted, and I know we certainly did for some scale, we shifted actually from gyms which were a little larger to thinking about cafeterias that would be a little smaller. And that was one way to get the size down. But I think in some respects, some of the complexity of certainly the earthwork and the retaining wall would still be there. And so while we might save some money in going that direction, there's no way we would close that gap. And so I think at this point we've kind of prioritized being able to add on the instructional spaces over the addition of the. We certainly can do both. In fact, the $2.5 million for the instruction spaces is still a little bit less than the cost of the cafeteria and warming kitchen. It's about 40% to 60% in terms of the ratio of cost for those things. But so I think it's an exercise we haven't done, but it's not going to appreciably lower the cost in that regard.
Anybody else have any questions? Emily, your hand's still up. I assume it's just left from before. Great. I don't see anybody, Mark.
Okay, very good. So we'll, from that, we're going to now go to the broader context of how our $10.5 million construction cost fits into the total project budget for the BFOF. So this is and it's very small, and you can't. We're not expecting that you'll look at every line item, but this was done in March of 2017, and so that's roughly 4 years ago now, and that was building up to the BFOF bond vote, and so at that time it was estimated that the Longfellow project would be about $12.5 million in construction. There's a budget number for construction. There's a budget number for administrative costs and reserves. There's a budget line or area for fees and services, and then the total project cost. And then there was an exercise to reduce the price and remove about $1 million out of that $12 million construction at that time. So the total project for Longfellow at that time was 15 million. But really, what was important, and this is looking at is all the different line items that were carried as soft costs, not necessarily just looking at what the construction costs were. So they identified a series of items such as the movable equipment, the project reserves, which are used for a bunch of unforeseen fees at the time. There's project contingency that's built on top of that construction cost, and we'll explain that in a minute here. And then there's fees for architects and engineers and the surveying work that needs to be done, the project manager that is assisting Doug and Steve, and the clerk of the works. All those fall within that group C. So that was Oak Point. And then after the Longfellow budget, we looked at what the total BFOF funds were available and how they would go forward in time, and we revised these values on the project budget. So at the time that Harriman started on the 3 remaining schools, that was in August of 2019, we had essentially a project budget built of the same 3 basic areas. These are in a different order, but it's essentially the same things. There was an administrative costs, there were the fees and services, and then there was construction cost. And at that time, we were looking at a total project cost of 14.6. This is long before we sort of had our review of the scenario 1A. And so most recently, what we did is we took all those soft costs and we then looked at them relative to what we've appropriated for the construction cost. So that $10.5 million is the top line that we have here. So that's our A, our construction costs, our $10.5 million. And again, that's roughly $8 million for the existing building and $2.5 million for the addition. The administrative costs and reserve, 2 important items in here that we have as a percentage of the construction cost, and one of them is 7% of the construction cost, and that's line item 3, movable equipment, and that's sometimes referred to as FFE, or furnishings, fixtures, and equipment. And that movable equipment line is to purchase new furniture for renovated spaces, to replenish furniture that's distressed or worn, and it's also to purchase instructional technology and tell data equipment in the building itself. So that is, in fact, we're right now in the process of doing that, the last portion of that with the Lyseth folks and replacing or buying furniture for their kindergarten wing right now. The other important one in here is to consider is the project contingency. There's a 10% project contingency line item that we hold in here, and 5% of that is split into 2 buckets. 5% of that is used for a bid contingency, and 5% of that is used for construction contingency. So that 5% for bidding contingency is available if to accommodate any changes in the market that occur that before we go out to bid. And so there's some concern that steel costs have escalated most recently this spring, that beyond what we would have contemplated as ordinary escalation for steel. This line item, that 5% of that construction cost, or half of that project contingency, is really intended to be able to be used to accommodate to buffer any of those changes in the bidding of the project. So if you really look at the construction amount of $10.5 million, that's what we're aiming for in our documents. If anywhere between 10.5 and about or 10.5 and about 11 million is where the zone of funds if we use that 5% bidding contingency. And that still leaves us 5% to accommodate changes that will inevitably come up when we start opening walls and seeing things that we didn't contemplate were there. Also, when we start digging in the ground. So there's always changes that will come up during the construction. The fees and services, those lines are pretty much as they were outlined either in the Harriman budget done in August of 2019 or in the Oak Point budget from the original. So those are for the architect's design services. It's for permits and approvals by the planning board and by the city inspection department. It's for survey of the grounds. It's for geotechnical engineering reports. It's also for testing that's required during construction itself. And also there's a line item that helps cover the cost, as we said, for the owner's project representative that assists Steve and Doug, and also for the clerk of the works that's really the eyes and ears watching the construction daily. There's also a line item here for commissioning, which we'll share a little bit about what that is. There's a $65,000 line item for commissioning in here. And so those soft costs, both the administrative reserve and the fees and services, those account for 25% of the total project cost. And that's what we use to estimate what they would be when we said, well, if we're using a $10.5 million construction cost, well, that would equate to about a $14 million project cost. And that's about where we're at. After we sort all those out, we're at 13.98 million. So that's about right on with respect to our total project. When we contextualize that for the overall BFOF and with the rest of the schools, the bottom line is that we add up all those project costs and we add up what we had for budget for LICEF, and we're right now about $175,000 or $176,000 under what the bond vote was. And so that's how we're tracking to make sure that we stay within the available funds of the what was approved by the voters and moving forward. So that's kind of the big picture of where we're at, and it's maintaining these individual construction dollar values and tracking closely what the total project costs are. I'll pause for a minute, and if there are any questions on the project budget.
Folks, put your hands up if you have any questions. Not seeing any.
So the next piece is commissioning, and Lisa Solomon is going to lead us in a discussion of what on earth commissioning is and why is it important and why are we paying $65,000 to do it. Lisa?
I'm going to pause for a second because I see a hand.
Okay.
I think Michael Barton has his hand up.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, just given the way things are unfolding here, has anyone had any conversations about the 3 remaining schools and any legality concerns about potentially throwing one back into the pot for BGS or a state-funded effort here to make sure we have like 2 out of 3 schools that get everything that they're looking for, as opposed to trying to scale things back?
No.
Are we able to get back into that process after we pulled out of it a few years ago?
I knew the answer to that at some point, Nick. I don't know what it is. So I don't know. I think that we can, now that I am sort of processing it just based on some of the conversations that I've had with Representative Brennan. But we have not contemplated that, Michael. You know, we just learned about this, a couple of weeks ago. And for us to undo everything that we've done and make a decision about which school and then reallocate the resources from, one of those schools to the other remaining 2 projects is, something that we have not contemplated at all.
I appreciate that. It was kind of a loaded question, so I just was curious.
That was a good question and good answer. Anybody else have any questions before we move on to commissioning?
All right.
Mike, your hand's still up, but nobody else I see.
All right, not seeing any other questions. I'm going to address the commissioning. And so commissioning is a third-party reviewer who comes in and reviews the design documents to make sure that the design complies with the owner's project requirements and essentially is executed per the basis of design. During construction, they are reviewing the installation and the testing of the different systems that they have been contracted to commission. Essentially what this does is it makes sure that the systems, and I'll explain what I mean by systems in a minute, are designed and functioning as intended. So really making sure that all of the effort that goes into designing efficient systems in the building when we are all said and done operate as intended. Mark, if you can go to the next slide. So some of the points on commissioning I've already touched upon. Some of the other items are that commissioning also verifies that operation and maintenance personnel and the occupants, those who are living within the building, are properly trained on how to use the different systems. And I'll pause here for a second to talk about systems. I know it's on a slide a little bit further, but when I say systems, they're looking at mechanical systems. They are looking at electrical controls. They're also looking at plumbing systems and the building envelope. Again, trying to make sure that they are operating as intended and as efficiently as possible. One of the biggest advantages is that the commissioning process can improve new building energy performance by 8 to 30%. And the next slide is going to show you those different systems that I mentioned before. So the list of the different systems that I touched upon. The other reason, I mean, it's definitely a best practice in the industry. It's done on almost every school building that we work on. But with these projects being LEED certified, it's a prerequisite or a requirement mandate as part of that program. So we are required to do it because we are going after LEED certification. But even if we weren't going after LEED certification, it would be something that we would recommend on the project. I think that summarizes commissioning. So if anybody has any questions about that, we can entertain those now or move on to the next topic.
Seeing any hands, any questions on commissioning? Doesn't appear to be.
Well, okay, that brings us to next steps. So the last wrap-up steps here for this project as we get ever so close to our bid date is just to finalize some of the security functions in the building itself, security systems that are part of, and in many ways part of either some of the door hardware, which is a big part of security, but also some of the other closed circuit cameras and intrusion detection, and so all those function together as part of the security functions of the school itself. And so we're going to be reviewing the building organization and where exterior doors require access control, and also thinking about the different layers of security through the building, as we put that final thing together. And so that's one of the last meetings we have coming up. We have interviews for the clerk position. So as we start thinking about construction and having a presence on site to monitor the construction, that will be interviews for that position. We're anticipating right now it's one position for all three schools. We had our first review of the Longfellow project at the last school board meeting, and that was on, I think, Tuesday evening. It seems a blur now, but and that was for those who stayed up for that. It was a marathon meeting, and we did present. We were happy that we got the opportunity to present the first reading to allow us to go to bid with Longfellow at about 12, a little after 12 midnight. So that was good, and I appreciate the opportunity to get that in. We have the formal vote of that on the next school board meeting. That's March 2nd. So that's right around the corner here. We have our next district advisory building committee meeting the third week in March. We'll have our next BLAC meeting for this group on March 25th, and so that'll be a few days, I think, before we get bids in on this project. And so, thinking about our bid schedule, again, we're going to bid on March 3rd. Right now, I think we had a scheduled bid opening on March 25th. We're trying to leave a 4-week window for contractors to look at all the drawings, put their prices together, get all the necessary forms, and get that all done. So that's our contemplated schedule right now. The one area that we're doing some last minute coordination is on the contract requirements and coordinating with the city on those, and planning board approval as well. So as we said earlier, the planning board is scheduled for the 9th, and so that should be in place by that time. So all that being said, I mean, we're right there. We're just about ready to put this out to bid. So that's pretty exciting after a long process to get to this point. And so we have a lot of last minute details to address and attend to, and we're doing that on a daily basis, and getting ready to really start this next phase of the Longfellow project. So with that, that's what we have for material tonight. And we'll open it up for any questions before we turn you folks back to your Thursday evening.
So do we have any general questions on anything from tonight or anything about the project? Joe?
Yeah. Has there been any notification to the public so that they are aware of the changes to the project from the community forums that we've had in the past? Has there any notification, anything gone out to people?
I mean, I've notified all the parents at Longfellow myself through my newsletter, so they're aware of the changes.
So is there any opportunities for additional funding sources that could be added to this? I know when we were on the road school, we had PTA involvement and things like that. Is there any other opportunities for additional funding?
Joe, the bonding requirements don't allow for additional sources of funding without going back to the voters. Javier or Mark, please weigh in if you.
Thank you.
That's correct. In terms of public funding, there could potentially be fundraising that would be done. But just looking at the scale of what we're talking about, Joe, that's highly unlikely that we would raise anywhere near that amount. I think the one piece that that is out there, and we just had the other two BLAC meetings, is to the extent that there are any, that the bids were to come in lower than what is currently budgeted, that the, whatever savings would result from that, or any additional costs that don't need to get incurred by the other projects for the, that are part of their reserves. What's the reserve at Longfellow is, it's $1 million. So if we came in $2 million under budget and, we were able to take that project contingency and put it towards that, we might be able to do what's been taken out in this particular case. But we are looking at this as a district project. So, if there were those types of savings resulting from either Presumpscot or Reiki, it would get pooled into a fund that then the DABC could recommend to the board in consultation with the different building level advisories of all of the alternates, because just like Longfellow has a list of alternates, so does Reiki, so does Presumpscot. We would make some decisions across the three projects in the same way that we made decisions across the three projects to go with the 1A design focusing on classrooms originally. So that's sort of the path that I see as most likely to being able to do any of that work.
Thank you.
Xavier, good question, Joe. Anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, hey, this is Luke.
Hey, Luke.
I'm just curious. So I feel like looking out into the future and the potential for another bond to, say, finish these projects out in the planning process, in the current iteration, could there be prep work going into it that would make it cheaper and more seamless if we are to do that work later on?
Mark, you want to?
Yeah. So thank you, Luke. Good question. What we're doing is ensuring that the design that we're doing right now, there's a couple pieces to that. One is that we're not doing anything that would prevent you from being able to add that piece pretty independently of everything else that's happening. So it could easily come in and do it. In fact, in some ways you have a shovel-ready design. You already have a design for it. It'll actually be, it's going through the planning board right now as well. So while there's a statute in terms of how long that approval for it would be, the fact that they've already seen it and would have approved it would make, seemingly it would make the approval process easier the second time around if they had already approved it the first time. So there's a couple parts to that, but that's sort of one way of looking at it, that it's you would have a very strong sense of what the cost of it is, because we're having a contractor price it right now. And so while you'd still have to look at escalation, you'd know what the cost for that scope discretely would be. And you also have gone through a process of permitting it.
Anyone else have any questions? Not seeing any hands. Any hands, real hands going up? I'm not seeing anyone unless somebody else is. So I think we're set to wrap up. Javier or Mark or team, anything else before we adjourn?
Just reminder that the board is scheduled to vote on approving this to go out to bid, and then I believe it goes out to bid at the end of the week, next week. So assuming that everything goes through with the board, which I expect based on our first read and workshop that it would, even though everybody was a little bleary-eyed at the time that we went through it, I think that we'll be rocking and rolling at the end of next week.
Sounds good. And thanks for the thorough update to everyone. It's certainly not news that everybody anybody wants to hear, but it's the reality of this project, and I'm sure the other two are having their own challenges. So thanks for all the good work on this, and I think we're all set to adjourn.